Hello there, YouTubers. This is another installment, the third installment of a couple of videos I did yesterday. And in this one, actually I had done it, I did a third one yesterday, but it just didn't work out very well as far as between the software and the phone camera and all that kind of stuff, so it just didn't work. So here I am doing it again. So in this installment I'm going to be talking about a few different subjects or topics, if you will, and they will include education reform, spiritual reform, let's see, what else do we have here, and human nature, and a few things in between that are kind of related with all three of those things. Okay, so first let's talk a little bit about education reform. Now in America, say 100 years ago, say before the the administration of education, or whatever the federal education administrator, whatever it is, it was started by John D. Rockefeller. And John D. Rockefeller was an industrialist in the late 19th century and early 20th century. Okay, he had lots of money, lots and lots and lots of money. He built a huge empire of industry. And he was also one of the, I guess, maybe founding members of a group that a lot of people referred to as the robber barons. And this group of people were called robber barons because they wielded so much wealth and influence, that they were able to get pretty much done whatever they wanted to get done. With the railroads, the oil industry, they were, the Rockefellers and the Standard Oil Company, which, in a side note, also involves Herbert Walker and Prescott Bush. You may recognize those names. Okay, so anyway, these robber barons, they were in agreement with each other that they would help each other build and maintain an empire, a monopoly of sorts. And as they did that, they were able to demand whatever prices they wanted for their materials, products, and services. So, and they were basically ruthless in it. They were driven people, and they were driving people as well, driving people into the poor farms, into their graves, just on and on. But anyway, so I just wanted to give you a little background history on John D. Rockefeller and what he had to do with the American educational system, the American public education system. He was responsible, or one of the people responsible, for the formation of this educational administration of the United States. And he was quoted as saying something to the effect of he didn't want really highly intelligent people working in his factories and stuff like that. He didn't want people that had individual thinking capabilities, critical thinking capabilities. He didn't want them to be too smart to figure out what exactly was happening to them, how they were being extorted by him. Okay, their labor and several other aspects of it. So he wanted people that were smart enough to run the machines, basically, but not smart enough to understand how this little control system of his, or theirs as being the industrialists at that time, how they felt about the common laborer. So they wanted them to be able to learn, they wanted them to learn to read and write, do a little, simple arithmetic, math, whatever. But they really didn't want people, the majority of the people, he didn't want them learning enough, because he realized that the more people learned and became knowledgeable about, certain systems and how the economy works and, just things like that, it would be a competition. These people that, if all these people became well educated, they would either shut his empire down and his friends' empire down, or they would rise up and they would be a very formidable competition for his industry and his friends' industry. So they didn't really necessarily want a lot of free-thinking people running around, free-thinking, educated people running around. So that kind of started, and that was a little over 100 years ago. And if you do the research and you go back 100 years and say the average person that had been through 8 or 9 years of school, let's say 8 years, with 8th grade being the highest, amount of like grammar school level, elementary school, I guess it would be called today or whatever. The people that generally, the students that were graduating the 8th grade, from the 8th grade, they had more knowledge and actually more common sense, but let's just stick with the knowledge. They had more knowledge than most of college graduates with bachelor's degrees have today. Okay? That's astounding. Okay? What happened? Well, apparently John D. Rockefeller's plan, or his at least influence on the American educational system, had an effect, but it wasn't a beneficial effect for most people. Okay? And that's sort of how things have been going for about 100 years. They sugarcoat things, and I say they, I'll just say the people that have the influence and power to, or have the power to influence legislation, and manipulate markets and such, so that, and it's almost designed, it seems, if you step back and take a look at it, just like we're learning a lot about the political influences and politicians that are in and have been in, serving in elected political positions, that they basically, for the most part, a lot of them, now they may start out with good intentions when they decide to go to Washington, and get elected, campaign and get elected for some type of representative position in the government. And while I'm on this, a good movie to watch is an old movie. It had Jimmy Stewart in it, and it was called Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. And it basically, now that was, I think, a 1930s movie or so. It's black and white, but it's a good movie. It's interesting to see how really nothing has changed since then in Washington. It's a very good movie. I would definitely recommend checking it out. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Okay, so let me get back to what I was going to say, was that these people start out with pretty good intentions. You would like to hope anyway, and then for whatever reasons, because these people that don't have the good intentions or are trying to somehow or another, end run around the way it should be done, and it's a form of corruption when that starts happening. So they get a couple of people they know, and working together, and they go, oh yeah, well, the old, if you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours kind of thing, and they learn how to game the system, and then as new people with these good intentions, come into the fold, well, they understand that in order to keep reaping the benefits that they do from gaming the system, they need to corrupt these good intentioned people that are coming in, okay? And they manage to do that in certain ways, and it's just a totally corrupted system. And not that it's not a good system the way it is theoretically set up, or how it was set up. It's just that the influence of these bad influences that get in there, and they spread the corruption, and they start, blackmail or framing, or, somehow entrapping people, and these people that are being entrapped or whatever, they end up having to support the system of corruption that's going on. So you move ahead 100 years, and we can see, if you have any firing brain cell in your brain, you can see the result of that little bit of corruption that grew and grew and grew. So that's where we're at now. It's just a system that, and the people, most of the people within it are totally corrupt. And then you have the people that aren't necessarily totally corrupt, but they really don't, if they've got a job that's paying good money with a good pension and what have you, they go right along with whatever's going on one way or the other, because they're not concerned. They say, hey, that person, you want it, you got to fight for it. You got to do it. You got to do your job, or you got to keep your mouth shut. You got to whatever. You can't make waves. You just go with the flow, and it's a corrupted flow for the most part in the environment of our nation's capital at this time, and has been for a very long time. So that's the education. And since then, since these people were graduating 100 years ago from the 8th grade, knowing more than what a 4-year bachelor degree student, college student, knows by the time they get out. Now that it may sound like an exaggeration, but do your research and go back and see what these kids coming out of the 8th grade back then knew. the exams that they took, okay? And they weren't given trophies for coming to school every day or what have you, or participating in the spelling bee, or that kind of thing. And I'm not downing that, but in order for people to learn, they must be challenged and not belittled and not insulted or anything. But if you don't have something to work past or to work through, and there's no challenge to it, you just somebody comes and goes, oh yeah, here you go, have this, and here you go, have that, or whatever. You don't appreciate it really. Not as much as if you had to really do some hard work, or and I say work in general and from a very wide perspective, as work with your brain, figure stuff out, your math, your science, whatever, doing your studying, okay? So there we have I think a good case for a matter of education reform. We're not necessarily promoting or supporting, that I know of anyway. I mean, it may be going on more than what I have an idea of, but basically the public education system does not necessarily promote critical thinking skills. It does, this is my opinion from what I've gathered from what I've heard, read, a little bit of research that I've done. They don't support or promote individual type of thinking, individual thought, stuff like that, creative. There are a lot of art classes and all, but there are also a lot of technological fields that creativity is very, plays a key role in a lot of technologically technological type of systems. So the creative thought processes, the individual thought, the independent thought, and it's kind of melded into these kids. They come out of school, or even if they're in school, and as they progress up through the grades, they look around and they see the environment. They're experiencing the environment that has grown up with them or around them. And I don't see anything wrong really with technology, but I do understand, because I've experienced it, how these kids can be entrapped, kind of say, to sitting in front of a television. And that's the worst, I think, is the television and the commercials and things like that, because all that is a psychological conditioning of a person that's watching this entertainment on the television, and the commercials that come on with it, and the programming of these shows that come on. There is something behind it, and you say, oh, this guy's a conspiracy theorist. No. Well, maybe I am. I'm a conspiracy analyst, I would rather be referred to as. But if you do the research and you read up on it, that there's a lot of stuff like that going on. And there's a lot of people that, they don't want to know. Okay, they won't admit to anything like that. They won't even consider it, because to do that for those people, I think one of the main reasons that they are in such a denial, it would mean that they have been taken advantage of for most of their lives, if not all of their lives, because anything that they've learned, anything that they've been told, or whatever, is like a half-truth, sort of just enough to misdirect or to mislead someone in not an accurate or a more efficient direction, but more so a direction that supports the systems within the systems that I had spoke about in the earlier installment episode that I did. And that's what it's all about. It's all about creating a system that is self-perpetuating, that it's set up so that the people guard themselves, so that the system continues to work like it's supposed to. Now, there are a few, for example, that, and I'm not going to call them fortunate people at all, because actually I feel sorry for them, because they have been conditioned, like these corrupt people that maintain offices, a lot of them in Washington, in the government, in these industries and whatnot, that apparently they have no really, or not a lot, hardly any, compassion or respect or anything for the people that they're representing, or for the country, or for the world for that matter. Because if they did, then the world and these problems that we're facing right now would have never gotten to the point that it has. The corruption would have never just gotten blown completely out of control. I mean, think about it. You consider yourself a decent person, an honorable, an upstanding, good character, an honest person. Would you continually, voluntarily continue to work for people that were constantly undermining the very principles of what their job is supposed to be, as in representing the tax-paying Americans, the tax-paying people of this country? So that brings into question for me is like, hey, something is way out of balance, and has been for quite some time. Now, and I'll give you an example of balance, would be a very simple one. Let's just say a tire on a car. And, you have to have your tires on your car balanced, because if they're not, as you start rolling down the road, if it's got more weight at one spot than the other, then, it's going to start wobbling. It's going to start vibrating, which will lead to a catastrophic failure somewhere, somehow, because it's out of balance. And if you look around at nature, there is a balance. Okay, there's a balance there. And when things are more in balance, and you get a little bit of movement this way and a little bit of movement that way, that's okay. But when it starts getting way out of balance, and it's from one drastic position on one side to the other, then that's going to lead to some type of catastrophic change. Okay? And that's what we're looking at right now, at least in the political environment, and I would go so far as to say in the environmental environment, our planet. With the dependency on these I'm not going to call them fossil fuels, but the petroleum products, the ways that they are being harvested, the fracking, it's taking almost, I think, 1 barrel's worth of, what a barrel of oil, the energy produced from that, it's taking almost 1 barrel of energy, worth of energy, to produce 1 barrel's worth of energy, 1 barrel of oil. That's unsustainable. You look at the just the overall disrespect and the destruction of a lot of the environments, the loss of the many species of wildlife, and you get into GMO, they think that they have all the answers, and they say, oh, well, we'll just tweak this and tweak that, and blah blah blah, and throw it on out there, and we're going to save a lot of energy having to farm from excuse me, on the ways that we farm, the techniques that we use. But really, I hadn't really seen much advantage to that, because food prices keep going up. As far as energy, gas and everything, and oil prices keep going up. And like I had mentioned in the previous video, this technology was supposed to help us get off of these dependencies, that were destructive to our environment, to our planet, to ourselves, to the people. But it seems that none of that has worked, and we're still creeping closer and closer to the edge of that abyss of where the hellish environment is. And the closer that we get to that hellish-like environment, the warmer, the worse things are. We can kind of sense what's going on, and we can look around and look at all the chaos that's happening. And meanwhile, we're always told, and we're coerced in various different ways to continue our plight, it seems, to that more hellish place, that environment to exist in. And I don't think that's not, I don't think, a very beneficial path for humanity to be on. So, I think we need to start pulling back and, getting things to move back towards a more heavenly, beneficial, type of environment, a more balanced environment. Because that would be best for everyone, whereas it seems like headed this way to the hellish type of environment is more beneficial to just compared to the population of the planet, it is only beneficial to a very small number, a very small percentage of, the over 7 billion people that, exist on this planet right now. So, and another thing is that kind of goes along with these industrialists and these big, now they're multinational type of corporations and all, and they're just ravenous for more resources and more profits and more power and control and stuff like that. And you have conglomerates like that, and say there's some type of natural resource, and as an example, just as an example, down, saying somewhere in South America, and they find this resource or whatever, and this is a beautiful, lush, very well balanced environment, like a jungle, the rainforest or whatever. And somebody finds out that, oh yeah, we could make buku money from the resources that are there. And there's, say, 100,000, not 100,000, but hundreds or thousands, maybe 10,000s or 10,000 of, say, indigenous people that live within that area where these resources have been discovered. So these big conglomerates, in a clandestine way, or clandestinely, are plotting a way, trying to figure out a way that they can get access to all of those resources. And with very little, if any, regard to the indigenous people that may be, living there, existing there. And so they'll try a couple of tactics, more than likely, and they'll get their PR firms, their public relation firms, to start gearing up for some type of campaign, so that it will be less traumatic or less negative looking on this company, conglomerate, this industry or whatever, to somehow get these people to either agree to let them come in and do whatever they're going to do and destroy this balance of the environment that's going on there, or they're going to clandestinely maybe figure something out that somehow affects these indigenous people, so that they can, for whatever reason, they can no longer exist in that area where these resources are. Or, they'll go in and maybe, spend a 0.1% of what they would make from these resources, and maybe throw these indigenous people a bone, with some maybe running water, or a little bit better housing, not much, just a little bit better, and like I said, with running water, maybe cleaner water temporarily, because a lot of times maybe those water systems are going to end up being polluted, and then those indigenous people won't be able to stay healthy drinking that water. So, but and it sounds cynical, and it really is, but it's never, it's done in such a way that they hide it very well. They are masters at manipulation and deception. The more you start learning and understanding how some of these things work, and you have to do your own research. You can't just rely on what somebody says. You can't rely on what I say. You need to do the research yourself. And I think I said something about it. People need to start realizing that it's very important for us, one, to understand ourselves, to know ourselves. And I know how people get turned off when people start talking about spirituality or whatever like that. But regardless of what your belief is, if you believe in something or if you don't believe in anything, but it's still a belief, one way or the other. And there's still something that keeps you waking up in the morning or whatever, and getting up and doing what you do. So, and as far as I'm concerned, that's part of that energy that we have within us. You know, something keeps us going. Because otherwise, people would just be walking out in front of cars and doing whatever, and they'd be offing themselves here, you know, if there was no reason or no, I don't know, you know, there just have to be some kind of reason for people to continue to wake up every day and, you know, do what they do. So, you know, that was education, spiritual reform, and this kind of leads into spiritual reform. And, you know, regardless if you're religious or if you're spiritual, if you're not either one, you know, whatever, but, you know, what I had said earlier in the earlier video, there is this virtual energy that we all possess and that we can use to our benefit. And the better you understand this, the easier it becomes, and the better your environment, your surrounding environment becomes. And that might be hard for some people to understand, but it is the truth. And this is why people need to do their own research and to come up with things and have a desire to learn this stuff, you know, because if you have no desire to learn anything, you're just this meat sack walking around that's driven by a very primitive, animalistic mindset. And a lot of people don't realize that they're being, you know, that they're driven like this. You know, they might hold a good job, a well-paying job, or whatever whatever it is. They may be good people, you know, within the community or whatever. But following the status quo these days, it's a reflection of the education system that has stopped promoting critical thinking, independent thinking or thought, you know, and a creativeness. And there, I think, I'm not going to mention it by name, but there are other, besides educational institutions and systems that also tend to stifle any type of movement away from the status quo. And it seems that the status quo is on time and on track, heading further and further, or getting closer and closer to that hellish type of negative environment, rather than, you know, using one of the switch tracks and heading back towards and getting closer to a more beneficial, a more heavenly-ish type of environment for our species, the human beings, to exist in. You know, and if you sit and you don't do anything, you know, what can I do? You do have the ability to make a difference. And it's not like you have to walk down the street with a sign protesting or anything. It starts, you know, like they say, charity starts at home. Well, your disposition and how you think and your perspectives, they start at home. You know, all it takes is thinking about and doing a little research and think about what's actually going on. Don't be so easily distracted, you know, watching these hamburger commercials and these makeup commercials and these drug advertisements and these, you know, and the shows that promote this banality. You know, it's insane. But people are people are very happy to be distracted like that, but it's not going to end well if we continue to be distracted like that. And if we have no understanding of what's going on, it's not going to be pretty if it continues like it is. So yeah, and as far as energy, like love, the virtual energy or whatever, on our money, they call money currency. Well, and I mentioned this too in an earlier installment. And on all of the U.S. Federal Reserve notes, they all say, I don't know how well this will come out if you'll be able to see it, but they all have, "In God we trust." Okay? And this is currency. Currency is energy. Current, electrical current. This is currency. This is pseudo energy. Okay? It's fake energy. The only power, the only strength it has is the belief and the faith that people put into it, that believe what it can do. That's kind of deceptive, don't you think? And also, do you think maybe not the God of the Old Testament, and I'm not trying to be religious or anything, but the Bible is a very well-known, compilation of a lot of different writings about this supreme being or whatever. Okay, and I'll just leave it at that. But the God of the New Testament, if we take the newest part, the New Testament part of the Bible, he was a lot more benevolent. It seemed to be a kinder, more understanding, gentler type of being. And I don't think that he would necessarily approve of what's happened with basically our planet, really, and how his "In God we trust" was put on this pseudo energy, So yeah, in God we trust. But do we really? We don't. We very seldom even hardly trust ourselves or our brothers and our sisters, our friends, and much less strangers, and people of different races and things like that. We don't trust them, and I think it's because we don't understand what love is and how love can work. We're giving like these fake husks or shells. It looks like a coconut. You're thinking you got a whole coconut, and it's kind of dense, kind of a little bit heavy or whatever. So you think, there's some good stuff inside of this husk. But when you crack it open, excuse me, you crack it open and there's really no sustenance in it. I'm not saying that coconuts don't have anything in them. I'm just saying it's like you've got this husk and it feels like it's got something in it and you're thinking it's got something in it. But in reality, when it gets cracked open and you look inside of it, it doesn't have anything beneficial in there for you, except the lesson and education in learning that just because it looks like this and it kind of feels like this doesn't necessarily mean that it is that. If it looks good for you, if it feels like it's good for you, but it really may not be any good for you at all, healthy, let's say healthy for you at all. So that's currency. Currency, and then, what is water between two banks, okay? Banks. Banks direct the flow of the currency, of the water, the currency, okay? Money, currency, and you put your money in the bank. You pay the bank for the place where you live. You need a bank account to do, for the most part, a lot of business, okay? Think about it. Think about the terminology. It's amazing, really, when you start clicking into it. Another thing with the large corporations, the industries, the businesses, and not even large ones, but smaller ones as well, they came up with this idea, and I don't know exactly where it came from, but you always hear, they lost this much money this quarter, they lost this much money last year, we're losing money, and really, I think that's a misrepresentation of terms, because I think a lot of it is that, a business will, they do forecast and they say, okay, well, this is what we did last quarter. So, we'll look at these statistics that we got from wherever or that we've kept, and it looks like we're on target to make